It was 11:51 at night. The lights of Newport Harbor looked like spilled jewels through the glass walls of my office, cold and distant. I pressed play on the voicemail from my mother, Jennifer. Her voice was not angry. It was bored, like she was canceling a lunch reservation. "Talia, we have discussed it. You're out. Not family. Do not come to the signing tomorrow." I stared at the phone. Seconds later, the screen lit up again. A notification from the family group chat. My brother, Austin, had hearted the message confirming my removal. The betrayal was not just absolute. It was casual. "Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community." I did not cry. Tears are just wasted hydration, and right now I needed clarity. I sat there in the silence of the glass office, staring at the thick manila folder on my desk. The label read "Crown Jewel" in my father's handwriting, but the contents were entirely my work. This was the $18 million listing, the waterfront property that was supposed to secure the family's legacy for another generation. For 6 months I had been the architect of this deal. I had courted the buyers, navigated the zoning laws, and smoothed over the cracks in the foundation, both literal and metaphorical. While my brother Austin was busy leasing Ferraris he could not afford and posting photos of himself holding champagne bottles he did not pay for, I was the one in the trenches. I was the fixer. That was my role. When Austin accidentally dipped into the escrow accounts to fund a weekend in Vegas, I was the one who quietly injected $350,000 of my own liquidity to cover the shortfall before the auditors noticed. I was not just an employee. I was the structural integrity of their entire lifestyle. I managed the compliance, the taxes, the licenses. I made sure the illusion of their success never shattered against the hard rock of reality. And yet, sitting there with that voicemail echoing in my head, I had to ask myself the question that had been haunting me for 5 years. Why did I stay? Why did I keep fixing it? It was not because I was weak. It was something more insidious. Psychologists call it the gambler's fallacy of relationships. It is the belief that because you have already invested so much time, so much money, so much emotional labor, that the jackpot must be due. You tell yourself that you cannot walk away now, because if you do, all those previous payments were for nothing. You think that if you just put one more coin in the slot, if you just fix one more crisis, the machine will finally light up. You think you will finally get the payout of parental love and respect you have been paying for your whole life. I had spent my 20s standing in front of a slot machine that was rigged to never pay out. I had poured my savings, my credit score, and my self-worth into a black hole, convinced that my utility would eventually buy their affection. But that voicemail, that was not just a rejection. It was the casino manager coming over, unplugging the machine and telling me to get out. It broke the trance. I looked at the file on my desk, and for the first time I did not see a family legacy. I saw a bad investment. I saw a liability that needed to be liquidated. I realized then that I was not waiting for a return on my investment anymore. I was cutting my losses. They wanted me out. Fine. But they had forgotten the most important rule of the game. You do not fire the person who holds the combination to the safe. It was 12:03 in the morning. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I simply opened my laptop. The screen came to life, casting a cool blue light across the desk where I had spent 5 years building their empire. I navigated to the Family Trust's secure banking portal. My parents, Jennifer and David, loved the prestige of the trust. They loved saying the words generational wealth at cocktail parties in Newport. But they hated the paperwork. They hated the compliance. They hated the tedious reality of managing assets. So, 5 years ago they made a mistake. Fatal one. To save themselves the headache of reading fine print, they made me the sole signatory. I looked at the pending transaction on the screen. The $18 million sale of the Crown Jewel property. It was scheduled to fund at 9 in the morning sharp. All it needed was the trustee's final digital authorization to release the deed and accept the wire transfer. My cursor hovered over the button. Then I remembered something Mr. Thomas, our family attorney, told me years ago. He was a man who had seen too many fortunes built on sand. We were sitting in this very office, late one night while I was fixing another one of Austin's compliance disasters. He had looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his expression grave. "Talia," he had said, his voice low. "If you build a castle for a king who hates you, make sure you keep the only key." I did not fully understand him then. I thought he was being cynical. Now I realized he was not giving me advice. He was handing me the blueprints for my own survival. He knew this day would come long before I did. Clicked revoke. The status bar flashed red. Transaction cancelled. Authorization withdrawn. I did not stop there. I navigated to the operating accounts. These were the veins that carried the blood of the business. The accounts that paid for my mother's country club membership, my father's leased Mercedes, and the staging fees for Austin's listings. I initiated a full administrative freeze. Under the reason for the freeze, I typed 2 words. Internal audit. Finally, I accessed the brokerage's central database. I changed the admin passwords. Every single one. I locked out the agents, the accountants, and the owners. In less than 10 minutes, I bad not just quit. I had turned off the oxygen. The building was still standing, the lights were still on, but the machinery inside had ground to a halt. Closed my laptop. The silence in the room felt heavy, but it was not the weight of guilt. It was the weight of a weapon finally being picked up. They wanted me gone. Fine. But they were about to learn that when you evict the foundation, the house does not just empty out. Collapses. The sun rose over Newport Beach with a blinding, cheerful indifference. From my balcony, I sipped black coffee and imagined the scene unfolding 3 miles away in the conference room of the brokerage. I knew exactly what it looked like. My mother, Jennifer, would be wearing her closing day Chanel suit, the one she saved for 8-figure deals. My father, David, would be pouring Dom Perignon into crystal flutes, already calculating his commission. And Austin. He would be sprawled in the leather chair, scrolling through listings for beachfront condos he planned to buy with money he had not earned. They would be toasting to their genius. To the $18 million that would wash away the sins of the escrow account. To the crown jewel that saved them. Then the door would open. I was not there to see it, but I felt the impact through the floorboards of my apartment. At 9:15 my phone, which I had placed face down on the marble counter, began to vibrate. It was not a ring. It was a seizure. The screen lit up. Austin. Fist line. Did not stop. One call bled into the next, a frantic, digital drumbeat of panic. I let it ring. I picked up the device and watched the notifications stack up like bricks. 79 missed calls in 12 minutes. Then came the voicemails. I pressed play on the first one from my father. Talia, pick up the phone. The title officer is saying there is a hold on the trust. It is embarrassing. Fix it. Then the second from my mother. Her voice was tight, pitched an octave higher than usual. This is not funny. The buyers are waiting. The system says you revoked authorization. Call me back immediately. By the 10th voicemail, the pretense of confusion had evaporated. It was just rage. Pure, unadulterated fury. You ungrateful little. You unlock this account right now. Do you hear me? You are destroying this family. I listened to the venom and felt nothing. No guilt. No fear. Just a clinical fascination. There is a concept in psychology I call the narcissist's panic room. We tend to project our own emotions onto others. We think that if our parents are calling us 79 times, it must be because they are worried or heartbroken or desperate to reconnect. But that is a projection of empathy where none exists. Narcissists do not feel heartbreak when you leave. They feel the mechanical confusion of a carpenter whose hammer has suddenly refused to drive a nail. They are not sad that the hammer is gone. They are furious that the hammer has the audacity to be a person. They were not calling because they missed their daughter. They were calling because the appliance that printed money had stopped working. They were experiencing the terrifying, claustrophobic realization that they had locked themselves in a room where they were the gods, but I was the one holding the oxygen supply. I did not answer a single call. I did not text back. I simply took another sip of coffee and watched the battery drain, percentage by percentage, as their world burned down through the receiver. I was not the fixer anymore. I was the audience. And the show was just getting started. At noon, I walked into the harbor diner. It was neutral ground, far enough from the brokerage to avoid prying eyes, close enough to be convenient. Mr. Thomas was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a black coffee and a weariness that seemed etched into his bones. I slid into the seat across from him. I did not order. I placed my hands on the table, palms flat. I was ready for a fight. I expected a cease and desist, a threat of litigation, or a plea to be reasonable for the sake of my parents' reputation. If you are here to tell me to unlock the accounts, I said, my voice level, you can save the billable hour. I am not moving. Mr. Thomas looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He did not look angry. He looked relieved. "I am not here to represent your father, Talia," he said quietly. "I resigned this morning." He reached into his briefcase. He did not pull out a lawsuit. He pulled out a thick, bound document with a red tab. He slid it across the Formica table. "I tried to warn David," he said. "I told him you would find out eventually. You are too good at your job not to. But they needed the cash fast, and you were the only checkpoint they could not bypass." I opened the file. It was not a contract. It was a forensic audit of the brokerage's escrow accounts, the sacred, untouchable funds held for clients. My eyes scanned the columns. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I just calculated. Account 4. Debit, 50,000. Account 48. Debit, 75,000. Wire transfer. Cayman Digital Exchange. I flipped the page. The total shortfall was $350,000. "Austin," I said. It was not a question. "Crypto," Mr. Thomas confirmed. "He has been leveraging client deposits for 6 months. He thought he could day trade his way into a fortune and pay it back before closing. He lost everything." The world sharpened into terrifying clarity. The picture finally made sense. The sudden sale of the crown jewel property. The fire sale price of $18 million when it was easily worth 20. They were not cashing out for retirement. They were plugging a hole. They needed $18 million of clean liquid capital to refill the escrow accounts before the state auditors arrived next month. And the firing, the voicemail, the accusation of disloyalty, was not because they hated me. It was because I was the compliance officer. I was the one who reconciled the ledgers every Friday. If I had been there for the closing, I would have seen the transfer discrepancies. I would have stopped it. They fired me because I was the only honest person in the room. They were going to use the sale proceeds to cover his felony, I said, my voice cold. They were going to wash the money through the trust. And if the sale had not gone through, Mr. Thomas added, or if the auditors came early, guess who the designated agent on the license is? Guess who would have been liable for the missing funds? Me. They were not just cutting me out of a deal. They were setting me up to be the fall guy for a Ponzi scheme. If the house of cards collapsed, it was my signature on the foundation. I looked at Mr. Thomas. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I drafted the trust, Talia. I wrote the bylaws. I know you are the only one who actually read them." He took a sip of his coffee. "This is my copy of the audit. It proves you had no knowledge of the theft. It proves you acted to protect the assets the moment you were terminated. Keeps you out of prison." Closed the file. The anger I had felt earlier, the sharp, hot indignation of a rejected daughter, was gone. It was replaced by something nuclear. This was not a family drama anymore. It was not a dispute over a job title or a hurtful voicemail. It was a crime scene. My parents had looked me in the eye, knowing their son had stolen $350,000, and decided that I was the expendable one. They were willing to sacrifice my freedom to save his reputation. I stood up. I picked up the shadow file. It felt heavier than the $18 million listing. Felt like a gavel. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas," I said. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I looked toward the door. "I'm going to finish the audit." The drive back to the brokerage took 10 minutes. I did not speed. I did not rehearse a speech. I simply drove, the file on the passenger seat beside me radiating a quiet, lethal heat. When I pulled into the lot, the scene was exactly what the data had predicted. The black SUVs of the buyers were idling at the curb, trunks popping open as assistants hurriedly loaded the champagne crates back inside. The deal was not just dead, it was being evacuated. But it was the other car that confirmed the timeline. A black sedan with government plates. The state auditor. The title company must have flagged the escrow discrepancy the moment I froze the accounts. I walked through the glass double doors. The lobby, usually a hushed temple of beige marble and fresh orchids, sounded like a trading floor during a crash. Phones were ringing unanswered. The receptionist was weeping into a tissue. I walked past her. I was not there to save the day. I was there to collect my favorite pen and the picture of my grandmother from my desk. "Talia." The voice cracked across the room like a whip. My mother, Jennifer, stood in the doorway of the conference room. Her Chanel suit was pristine, but her face was a map of terror. Her mascara had begun to smudge, a black tear tracking through the foundation of her composure. She rushed toward me, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Thank God. You are here. Fix it. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. Let go, mother. The buyers are leaving, she hissed, her voice trembling. The auditors are asking for the ledgers. Austin is. He is in the bathroom, he will not come out. You have to sign the release. You have to unlock the trust. Whoa. Do you have any idea what you are doing? Her voice rose to a shriek, drawing the eyes of the terrified staff. You are sending your brother to prison. Is that what you want? To see him in handcuffs. I did not steal $350,000, mother, I said, my voice cutting through the hysteria. I did not gamble away the client deposits. I did not set up a Ponzi scheme to cover my tracks. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. It was a mistake. He made a mistake. We were going to pay it back with the sale proceeds. That is not a repayment plan, I said. That is money laundering. He is your brother. She pleaded, switching tactics instantly. The anger melted into a weaponized fragility. We are your family. You cannot destroy us over money. Please, Talia. Just sign the authorization. We will sell the house, we will fix the accounts, and no one has to know. Do it for the family. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had left me a voicemail at midnight, firing me like a temp because I was an obstacle to her crime. I looked at the father who was currently in his office, likely shredding documents that were already backed up on the cloud. I reached into my bag. I did not pull out the token of surrender she wanted. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, drafted by me, notarized by Mr. Thomas an hour ago. I am doing this for the family, I said. I pressed the document into her chest. What is this? She whispered. It is a notice of trustee removal, I said. For Austin. And for you. Her eyes widened. The trust bylaws are very specific, I continued, reciting the clauses I had memorized 5 years ago. Any beneficiary who engages in criminal activity involving trust assets, or who attempts to defraud the estate, forfeits their position and their interest. Immediately. You cannot do that, she stammered. We are the parents. We created the trust. And you made me the sole signatory to avoid the taxes, I reminded her. You gave me the sword because you did not want to carry the weight. Now I am using it. I stepped back. The air around me felt incredibly clear. I am freezing the assets to protect them from your negligence, I said. I am handing the audit over to the authorities to ensure I am not named as a co-conspirator. And I am resigning as your fixer. Behind her, the door to the conference room opened. 2 men in suits walked out. One was the state auditor. The other was a police officer. They were heading toward my father's office. Austin is going to jail, Jennifer wailed, the reality finally piercing her delusion. Austin committed a felony, I said. You were just the getaway driver. I walked to my desk. I picked up the silver-framed photo of my grandmother. I put my pen in my pocket. I did not look back at the chaos. I did not look at my mother collapsing into a chair, or my father being escorted out of his office. I walked out the front door into the salt air of Newport. The wind felt different. Did not feel like a storm anymore. It felt like the pressure dropping after a hurricane passes. The house of cards had fallen, and for the first time in my life, I was not standing underneath it. 6 months later, the silence in my apartment was not heavy. It was expensive. It was the kind of silence you earn. I stood on my balcony, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. This was not a glass-walled office I managed for someone else. This was a property I owned, bought with the consulting fees from my new job at an ethical investment firm. They did not hire me to fix their crimes. They hired me to prevent them. The fallout from that morning in the brokerage had been absolute. The collapse did not happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing liquidation. The $18 million deal remained dead, buried under the weight of the audit I had handed over. To keep Austin out of federal prison, my parents had to do the one thing they hated most. They had to pay. They liquidated everything. The vacation home in Aspen, the country club memberships, the leased Mercedes, and finally, their own house in Newport. They drained their retirement accounts to refill the escrow fund and pay the fines. Austin got probation and a lifetime ban from holding a real estate license. He was currently living in a rental apartment with my parents, 3 people crammed into 2 bedrooms, blaming the world for a tragedy they wrote themselves. My phone buzzed on the railing. It was a number I did not recognize. A voicemail popped up. I did not play it. I knew the voice. I knew the script. It would range from weeping to rage, begging me to come back to fix it, to loan them money because family helps family. Pressed block. It was the 4th new number this month. There is a concept I have been thinking about a lot lately. It is called the peace of the severed limb. Society tells us that cutting off your family is a tragedy. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, that you only get one mother, one father. They tell you that walking away is an act of cruelty. But they are wrong. Walking away from a toxic family is like amputating a gangrenous limb. It is the most painful, unnatural thing a human being can do. You wake up in the middle of the night with phantom pains, reaching for a connection that is not there anymore. You feel the ache of the empty space where your support system was supposed to be. But then you realize something else. You realize the fever has broken. You realize the poison that was pumping through your veins, making you sick every single day, has stopped spreading. You hurt, yes, but you are alive. I did not lose a family that day in the brokerage. Saved a life. My own. I poured a glass of wine. A vintage I bought just because I liked the label, not because it impressed anyone. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I was not the fixer anymore. I was not the trustee. I was not the daughter who had to buy her own seat at the dinner table. I was just Talia. And for the first time in 29 years, the foundation under my feet was solid because I had built it myself. I raised my glass to the empty air, to the quiet, and to the woman I had become in the fire. To the family we choose, I whispered. And to the peace we earn. Took a sip. Tasted like freedom. If you have ever had to save yourself by walking away, type freedom in the comments. And share this if you believe respect is the only currency that matters.